Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
It is Friday. So glad you're with us on the Three Martini Lunch. We have good, bad, and a crazy martini that you're really going to enjoy as a conservative, I think. And so, Jim, let's get started. The convention season is over. We'll talk about that a little bit more in the second martini. But for the good martini today, it's got a couple of different twists to it. If anything good has come in terms of the unrest in the streets this week, because it certainly hasn't stopped, that would be the good, really good thing. It's that apparently the Democrats, after 3 months, have finally gotten wind of this. And some might say, well, now they're going to claim that they were in favor of no riots in the first place, and it's going to muddle the message. Or you can obviously make the case, like we did earlier this week, that the only reason this is coming up now is because they see the polls are souring on their lack of a response to this. Well, I think ultimately we want peace in the streets. So if we can get there, that would be a good thing. The article that is kind of the basis for this is from The Atlantic. Of course, it's completely based on the writings of a guy who desperately wants Joe Biden to win. And so it's essentially saying that Joe Biden needs to get back out in front of this, claiming that Biden has actually spoken out against the violence multiple times and forcefully in the past 3 months, which isn't exactly true. But he says Joe Biden needs to go to Kenosha, have a moment with the Blake family, and then also have a moment with the Kenosha business owners whose livelihoods have been destroyed. And then he would have the high ground in this situation. Who knows if that is going to happen? Who knows if that is going to work, even if he did try that, given his lack of commentary on this in the past couple of months. But the fact is, we're seeing a crossroads here with how people are reacting to what's happening in the streets. First of all, if you watched the aftermath of the Trump speech in the South Lawn of the White House last night, you saw that people leaving the White House grounds were accosted, some bumped, some jostled, certainly shouted down and screamed at and berated. That is certainly not going to go well for the Democrats. That pretty much backs up a lot of what Trump and Pence were saying over the past couple of days. And then there's also different attitudes among Democrats on how to approach this. First of all, here is squad member Ayanna Pressley of Massachusetts. She's probably the least well known, but she's certainly vocal as well, saying everybody's got to keep taking it to the streets.
Make the phone call, send the email, show up. You know, there needs to be unrest in the streets for as long as there's unrest in our lives. And unfortunately, there's plenty to go around.
And then, in stark contrast to that, here is Tennessee Democratic lawmaker John DeBerry Jr. This is actually from more than 2 weeks ago, talking about how this type of protest that we're seeing now is nothing like he and his father were doing back in the 1960s. People got to wake up because this type of protest does no good at all.
They're getting emboldened because we act like a bunch of punks, too frightened to stand up and protect our own stuff. You tell me that somebody got the right to tear down property that Tennessee taxpayers paid for? That American taxpayers paid for? And somebody has the right to destroy it, deface it, and tear it down? What kind of people have we become? That we can't protect our own stuff. Peaceful protest ends peacefully. Anarchy ends in chaos. And what we see happening right now, any of us with any common sense whatsoever, know that what we see is not peaceful.
And so, Jim, he says that this type of rhetoric on his part could cost him his seat. It did cost him the primary. He's looking at running as an independent now, but he's obviously right. So what do you make of where we are in this back and forth over this issue, especially on the Democratic side?
Yeah, I was kind of heartened to see that Atlantic essay because I think, first of all, and I also saw quite a few people reacting to it. I think, George Packer wrote it. I think a lot of other prominent Democrats were thinking it. And by the way, I think it would be terrific if Joe Biden did as George Packer recommended. He went to Kenosha. He not just met with the families, but that he really put his heart into arguing people should not be rioting, they should not be looting, they should not be setting fires and arson, and they should not be assaulting people, that these have no place and they undermine the cause that they stand. Biden has made, I would characterize it like check the box statements along these lines in the last couple of days. And when you say, where's Biden? They'll point to this. Okay, fine. Yeah, it just hasn't really broken through now, has it? No, I think, again, the visuals of seeing Biden in these communities I think would have a bigger deal. What Packer is saying is just kind of building upon what that New York Times article said earlier this week. By the way, for anyone who was wondering, John Garrity out in Wisconsin is not a relation of mine, as far as I know. But this is, it's reasonable. The other thing is that Kenosha is kind of one of the swing districts in what's a pretty darn important swing state. And if, lots of folks who had not been terribly enamored with Trump are looking at the response of the mayor and look at the response of the governor and saying, where are these guys? They just can't seem to keep the peace. They can't seem to keep order. People are losing their businesses and their livelihoods every single day. Well, that's, they're probably a little less likely to get all enthused about Biden. They might say, maybe Trump's got a point. Because there's been this argument of, oh, well, if you're complaining about this in Biden's America, it's happening in Trump's America. Yeah. Do you think if Trump was the mayor of Kenosha, things would be different? Do you think if he was the governor of Wisconsin, you think things would be different? The president doesn't run local law enforcement. The president can only send the National Guard if the mayor consents. You get into really murky areas if the president says, I know you've said not to send them. I'm overruling you and sending them. Democrats should be able to stand up and say, whatever else you think of Black Lives Matter, arson is bad. That's all we're asking for. Arson's bad, okay? That's really not expecting that much. And so the fact that Democrats are doing this, I think this does indicate, whether you see it in the particular poll numbers, whether you see it in kind of anecdotal evidence, focus groups, for some reason, the mood amongst a bunch of Democrats has gotten very nervous about this, which is good news if you're rooting for Trump. It means obviously they're seeing something that makes them very nervous. But I think the bigger thing is, it would be really nice to have two parties that could lock arms and have this one clear, unified message. Ideally, that yes, we all want to see equal justice under the law. We want to see police harassment and misconduct dealt with. We want to see it wiped out. But we also want to see people obeying the law, and we do not want people thinking that it's okay to commit violent acts and destroy other people's property because they're really mad about politics or they're really mad about something. And you probably a really egregious example earlier this week in Minneapolis, where it was a person committed suicide, was erroneously interpreted as a police shooting, and it ended up turning into violence in downtown Minneapolis again.
The question, though, is whether Biden speaking out now is going to accomplish anything. Because, theoretically, you were talking about this earlier in the week, people who are ostensibly in some ways on the same side as you, will they listen to you? So if Biden goes out there and says, look, I know you're upset with this administration, but this has got to stop, and it doesn't stop, does that make him look even weaker and more feckless than he already has by saying virtually nothing? And the other thing I'm thinking is, okay, he had 8 hours of prime time last week to talk about this, even in the slightest. And the entire party and his speech and Kamala Harris's speech said nothing about it. So at what point does he lose credibility by speaking out about it after the convention where it never came up and after 3 months where he barely mentioned it at all?
So way back in 1992, Bill Clinton running for office, he pretty much had won the primary at this point. And he had what they called the Sister Souljah moment, right? Sister Souljah was this hip hop or rap artist who had said something along the lines of, if black people shoot black people every day, why can't we just have one day where black people shoot white people? And Bill Clinton came out and said, this is wrong, and basically, ripped into her at a time. I think it was an event that, Jesse Jackson was there, and this angered a decent number of Democrats who felt like, we're not supposed to, somehow there's something morally wrong about criticizing anybody in the black community, no matter how outrageous the statement. You're not supposed to do this. And Bill Clinton was like, no, I need to indicate to people that what Sister Souljah is saying doesn't represent me, doesn't represent my values, and I think it's wrong. I need to reassure boring old white suburbanites that I stand with them when people start talking about let's shoot white people for a day. Right? I remember also in my, long ago, it feels like a lifetime ago, talking to Bobby Jindal, and he talked about taking over and the state of Louisiana and its reputation. And he basically, they'd been ranked 50th in government ethics laws. That was the most lackadaisical environment you could about getting gifts if you served in the state legislature and things like that. And he basically said, look, if we're 50th and we pass a bill that takes us up to 45th, nobody's really going to change their minds about us. Everybody's going to think, okay, made a little bit of improvement, no big deal. Businesses aren't going to come in. We're still going to have a reputation as having a state government. If you want to change people's perception of you, you got to make a big dramatic step, right? And that's why the state ended up passing the toughest legislation about disclosure of gifts and limiting gifts and all that kind of stuff. So it was one of those things where it was like, if you want to change the perception of you, you can't just make a half step. You got to make a big, bold statement to make people look up and say, whoa, well, okay, I did not expect that. Joe Biden offering a standard violence is wrong sentence in an otherwise sentence about how bad police violence is and how this is happening too often in America and America's police. He's made perfectly fine generic speeches in which, as I said, he's just kind of checks that box. It's not going to do any good. If Joe Biden goes out and says, and you see real anger in his voice, you see real outrage, well, maybe this will move the numbers. And even if it doesn't change, even if the protests continue, even if the riots continue, even if arson, even if all the bad things continue, at least Biden will have been kind of inoculated himself on the issue of, is he okay with this, or is he turning a blind eye to this, or something? One other point in that Packer article is he acknowledges what many conservatives have been saying: the rate of violent crime in just about every major American city has increased in the last 3 months. Now, this isn't direct. It's not like you have a protest and automatically people start shooting each other or stabbing each other. But when police are under attack and police are villainized, maybe the police get a little more hesitant about enforcing the law. Maybe they don't go into neighborhoods as often as they used to. Maybe they're a little more cautious when they, respond to a report of shots fired. And probably that's having an effect on the policing in America. And that's why you're seeing, violent crime numbers go up. So I'm glad to see Democrats now recognize this as a promise to quote the wisest philosopher in the history of the world. Welcome to the party, pal. And we will, hopefully good things will come out of this.
Ongoing riots while Joe Biden gets inoculated would not be a good martini. But let's see if he speaks up and if he says something that actually resonates with people. All right, Jim, let's move on to our bad martini now. And bad might be an exaggeration, but it was certainly an odd speech last night. I certainly felt that the Trump speech, as most folks concluded, went on too long. It felt more to me like a State of the Union address than a convention speech. I thought the night built up to it well. You tweeted out that, it should have just come to a close after you had Alice Johnson telling her story and the gut-wrenching story of Ann Dorn and her husband, who was killed trying to protect a store in St. Louis during those riots, and the parents of Kayla Mueller, who was killed by ISIS and so forth. Chris Wallace thought making an interesting point last night in the post-game show on Fox that said, as you read the speech, it kind of leapt off the page. But I don't know whether it was the teleprompter or what it was, but Trump at various times kind of seemed to miss his marks. As I watched a few of the reruns, it came across a little better, but it wasn't nearly as tight as the Pence speech, and it didn't have the same energy that a Trump speech normally has. So I don't know what the ultimate result of that is going to be. He obviously pointed out a lot of Biden's weaknesses, and if you listen carefully, he talked about some very distinct policy differences, which I think are important, but it wasn't quite the packing of a punch that we probably expected.
No, and look, there are a lot of readers of my blog and readers of National Review and probably listeners of this podcast who wanted to hear Trump gave a great speech last night. I'm afraid he didn't. You can salvage it. And like I said, this has overall been a very strong Republican convention. It's kind of, of all the problems you could have, having three of the speakers earlier in the night just hit absolute home runs is really not a bad problem to have, right? And so it was kind of tongue in cheek, but it was a recognition that, boy, officially things kind of kicked off around 8:30, and just in that, that small window, Ann Dorn, just breaking everybody's hearts, talking about her husband being killed in the line of duty. Carl and Marcia Mueller talking about their daughter and ISIS, and I think like an important message came up every now and then in this convention. Just kind of remarkable. Greg, we don't talk about ISIS very much. We don't worry about ISIS very much. And there was a time not that long ago, the Paris Theater, the San Bernardino, Orlando. It would be very hard to picture if I'd said to you, yeah, by August 2020, people are just going to forget about ISIS. It's just not going to be a problem. We're going to have a whole bunch of other problems, but we're not going to be worried about ISIS. And Alice Johnson, who I've seen at the Koch network meeting and stuff like that. The First Step Act and what good, well thought out, careful criminal justice reform can do for you. And this is all great. And then at 10 o'clock, they went to Ivanka Trump. And I'm sorry, none of the Trump kids did a particularly good speech. Don Jr. wasn't bad. Ivanka wasn't bad last night. It just is. I'm not surprised the Trump kids think their dad is a terrific president. They're just surprised. I'm not surprised Mike Pompeo thinks that Donald Trump is doing a terrific job as president. Yes, Biden used his kids, but if you're going to bring in the family, you might as well use them for the humanizing stories. It's kind of a weird thing that Greg, that the most humanizing story we heard out of this entire convention came from Herschel Walker.
Right.
Describing he had Donald Trump in a full suit going on the It's a Small World ride at Disneyland. If you're bringing out the family, tell the funny stories. Show us the side of Trump that we don't get to see every other time before he steps in front of the podium. Don't have him talk policy. That's not, anybody can talk policy. You presumably, as his child, have a unique insight into what makes Donald Trump tick. And while you can say, there's nothing particularly wrong with what Ivanka Trump said, it was not that great. And by the time they got handed over, it was probably around 10:25 last night. Between 10:20 and 10:30, they had the whole coming down the steps with Melania, and there was about 10:25. Trump is now speaking. And I know that, usually conventions, they try to have them end at 11 o'clock on Eastern. It is not unusual for them to go over, and it's really not unusual for the nominee's speech to run over. By itself, it's not the problem. 70 minutes is a problem. It was a really long speech. You could have cut 2/3 out, and it would have been a perfectly fine speech. And the other thing, which, again, for everybody who thinks I'm constantly bashing Trump and all that stuff, look, the closing it with fireworks that spell out Trump 2020 above the White House, that's about as good as it gets, right? Short of doing having the Blue Angels dump balloons, that's really about as good as it gets. There were reports yesterday that even the protesters on the north side of the White House were just stopped. They stopped protesting and chanting because the fireworks display was so amazing. It was right up there with what you're used to seeing on the 4th of July. That's a great ending. Why don't you want to do that at 10:55 so everybody sees that before 11 o'clock? I suppose you can make an argument, this will be good on the West Coast. And Greg, we know how many really deeply competitive states are on the West Coast. Look, I don't know if people were starting to go to bed earlier in Florida and, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, New Hampshire, stuff like that. Look, a long speech, a lot of people catch it through social media or on the news reports the next day. It's not the end of the world, but it's kind of a missed opportunity. And having seen so many good arguments and so many, kind of compelling speeches from other folks in this convention, just feels like they kind of missed that, it wasn't the closing note that just nailing it the way you wanted to. And again, I thought it was not also you could tell, we've seen Trump ad lib. We know what Trump speaking off the cuff is like. We've seen Trump stick to the script before. Usually he does this in his State of the Unions. I think his State of the Union speeches are really good. I think it's pretty clear Trump finds his prepared speeches not as interesting as his own riffs, And so what we got last night was apparently a very long speech. And he started riffing and kind of inserting his own improving here and there towards the end. And it just made it continue and continue and continue. And, there were perfectly fine sections in it. And maybe it'll be fine. It just kind of feels like they could have a very good convention, didn't quite stick the landing as I think they probably wanted to. I don't think it'll make a huge difference in the polling numbers. I don't think if Trump loses, it's not going to be because his convention speech was too long. But I do think and we'll see. If Trump doesn't get a significant bump out of this week, then I think it's time for them really to be nervous about how things are going to go in November.
Be very curious to see what the poll numbers are. I did see one this morning. I don't know who did it, and I don't know how good their track record is, but it had Trump up 2 in Michigan. And the latest state polls in Michigan have had Trump struggling to keep it within single digits. So if there's any accuracy to that, it could have been an effective week. But until we see some more concrete numbers in a number of different states, I think we're going to be in a holding pattern to see just what the impact was. But certainly our impression was, for the most part, this convention exceeded expectations.
Yeah, and let's just make one final note that I put in today's Morning Jolt. Actually, you look at most of these swing states, Biden's ahead usually. I think if you're the Trump campaign, if you're close in Michigan, you'll take it. But these leads are 4 points here, 3 points there, sometimes up to 6 to 7. They're high. Look, you'd be happy with those kind of leads particularly in those upper Midwestern swing states. But Absolutely. Nationally, Biden is up 10 points, 11 points, 12 points. So I decided to check, okay, let's look at these blue states. Let's look here in Virginia. And I looked up in New York, and I haven't checked all of them. I could probably check polling in California too and all that stuff. But basically, in Virginia and New York, Biden is currently polling better than Hillary Clinton finished in 2016. So possibly the blue states are turning bluer, which is, bad news for Republicans in Virginia and New York. But if you're Joe Biden, that doesn't really help you. Building up your margin in blue states, you got a bunch of red states you want to flip over to your side. So I think there's something, kind of an indicator. These top-line national numbers, people can look at that and say, oh, my God, Biden's up 10. Well, this thing's over. Maybe not. Maybe not. These swing states are closer. And if they end up getting, if Trump can get any kind of a bump out of this, then we've got a race. Then we've got something competitive and something worth watching all the way to the end. If not, then, okay, yeah, maybe this has been, maybe people made their decision on who to vote for a long while ago.
Yeah, pure delusion on the Trump side. I think even the president said at some point this week that he thought New York was in play. That makes George W. Bush's decision to spend a lot of money in California towards the end of the 2000 campaign look genius compared to that. Spending a dime for Republicans on anything statewide in New York right now is a fool's errand, as well as Virginia, probably, unfortunately. All right, let's talk about our crazy awesome martini, Jim. A lot of times our crazy martini is something that's outrageous or just stupid, but today it's crazy awesome. You and I are not, and we need to stress this, not into video games at all. The last video game I mastered was the original Super Mario Brothers, okay? So, it's been a while. And so Call of Duty has been out for a while, but they come out with different versions. And this is Call of Duty Cold War Ops. And the scene we're going to take you in is inside the Situation Room, apparently in the early days of the Reagan administration, because Al Haig is still Secretary of State, which is a job he didn't have for very long. And so, Jim, here are the orders for a clandestine mission to take out a Soviet agent named Perseus, courtesy of President Reagan.
Gentlemen, you've been given an important task, protecting our very way of life from a great evil. There is no higher duty. There is no higher honor. And while few people will know of your struggles, rest assured, the entire free world will benefit. I know you won't fail us.
Now, Jim, I have to make a confession. I was wearing my Reagan Bush 84 t-shirt pretty much every night as I perused the convention this week. What would it be like to actually be in a Situation Room and have President Reagan give you the green light for a clandestine op to take out a high-profile Soviet target?
I was going to say, I saw this yesterday evening, and I walk into my house, and my older son sees me smiling. I'm like, Dad, why are you smiling? And I said, son, it's okay for you to play video games. Try to limit how much time they play video games. Don't always succeed. And his eyes lit up, and I said, let me show you the trailer for Call of Duty, Cold War, Special Ops Cold War. And he's probably heard of it, but, Call of Duty is usually a pretty realistic, pretty grown-up, combat simulator, war game, type thing. And, he's like, huh? And then he sees Reagan. He's like, okay, this is why Dad, is into this. Greg, I don't know about you. I am ready to go out on secret missions that are blatantly illegal on orders from President Reagan to defend this country. I'm not into video games. I probably will get shot within the first couple seconds. I stink at these things. The last video game I was good at was Civ. I'm much more of a big picture kind of guy. But still, the only thing that could make this any better, it was a great scene, and you got to go watch this, folks, because the sound is good, the audio is good, but they really did a really fantastic, CGI photorealism to make it look like Reagan is saying these things. I just think the dialogue was good, Greg. I just feel like it could have been a little better. Something a little more along the lines of, well, this Perseus character is getting up to my keister, I tell you. I want to get as fed up with him as I am with Gaddafi and Ortega down there in Central America. I want somebody to go up to him and say, well, you've had it, pal. That's my Reagan. So it was very good. It just felt not quite the Reagan we're used to seeing and stuff. But yes, I just saw that. So I was like, Well, I understand even in the controls, Greg, you press F and it'll trade arms for hostages. That's how awesome this game is.
Yeah, I don't know if they have Ollie North walking behind him in the hallway at some point or one of those people. But that was great. And the character's name is Adler. So it kind of makes you work a little harder to put yourself in that position since they actually named the character. But I can just imagine you and I sitting there where Al Hagg's introducing us and Reagan cuts him off and says, I know who they are. Who do you think authorized their last mission?
Yes.
So, yeah, he's, they say...
They're the ones who set up the Disney CTU.
Exactly. They say there's coaches you want to run through a brick wall for. Yeah, there you go, right there. Ronnie, good times. Jim, quite a week. Convention season is over. We'll see you on Monday.
See you Monday, Greg.
Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos, Radio America. Thanks for being with us today. Be sure to subscribe to the 3 Martini Lunch. We would love to have you give us a 5-star review and we would love to have you give us a 5-star rating and a kind review. Reminder, you can also get us on those home devices. You just have to say play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. And please join us on Monday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.